But thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Gail. Thank you, Gail.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for a really lovely Bristolian welcome. What amazing food, by the way. I haven't had any yet, so I hope somebody's put some aside for me because I fancy the look of it. I didn't feel like eating to start off with. Can I just get a bit of a sense of who's here? Is there anybody here? It's a funny word, activism, actually. It's a label. I really recommend Anthea Lawson's book, Entangled Activist. But is anybody here sort of new to political activism or climate activism-ish? Oh, a special welcome, special welcome, special welcome. And has anybody been around for like a few years? Just a few years, maybe? Yeah? And what about our old-timers? You know, who's been doing it forever? Thank you, all of you. Yeah. So, I've got too much to say tonight than is reasonable to expect people to stand up and listen to, and I did try and cut it down. I think I'm sort of practicing on you a little bit, if I'm honest. And I think it probably is something that might need breaking up into trainings and workshops. People learn through workshopping, through listening, through talking, rather than just one-way transmission. So I just wanted to name that. I'm trying to open up a conversation and a process, and if people are interested in making something more of it, welcome. We could come and see me afterwards if you want to help with that. And then the other thing is, do you know what, do we have a microphone stand, actually? Because I'm finding this a bit, it's fine if we got one. If we haven't, it's all right, I'll just deal with it. I might bring a few practices in. Anything that I suggest we do is by invitation. But part of what I'm talking about in being the change is that we aren't these kind of computers stuck on the top of some, mechanical flesh. We're human beings in life, and we need to be here in our bodies to be really present. And there are ways in which we can shut down and not be able to be in full attention, and there are other ways in which we can be more present. And some of the ways that we can work with our bodies help that. So just for example, right now, if you feel to, can you wriggle your toes in your shoes? And just feel them. It needs a different bit of your brain to get into your toes. It's getting in our bodies. Next slide, thank you. So let's just get the bad news over with to start off with. It's not good. David Spratt, who's Australian, sort of communications expert on climate, has done a summary for us recently. It's just come out in the last month or so. The atmospheric greenhouse gases are rising. They've risen in 2022. There's no sign of them declining soon. The warming's heading for this 1.5 degrees, which is what all the goals have been set around, 1.5 degrees. That we're going to hit that around 2030. And the idea that we're going to stop around 2 degrees of warming is not credible based on the actions that any governments are taking. There's also the issue of the carbon emissions that come out when the permafrost melts and the dangerous feedback climate loops they can trigger. They're not accounted for in most models, apparently. And if we were including them, there wouldn't actually be any carbon budgets left. It's obvious to me there's no carbon budget left, in fact. And this is just a carbon story. There's other stories about water and biodiversity and so on. And then this sort of idea that we can grow the warming up to about 2 degrees C and then sort of somehow stop it there is just like nonsense. Climate systems don't work like that. You can't just decide to park it somewhere. You trigger tipping points and it carries on. So what the International Energy Agency is saying is that it's possible that the emissions will peak around 2025, but they're not showing any signs of decline in them. They're just going to plateau from what people are saying they're going to do. What does that mean in terms of temperatures? It means that we're heading for somewhere between 2.7 and 3.5. James Hansen, the father of climate science, before Christmas with others, put out a paper talking about 10 degrees of warming. 10 degrees of warming. It's out for peer review. In a Nature paper, 6 in 10 climate scientists said they're expecting at least sort of 3 degrees by the end of the century. And when you hit these tipping elements and they sort of cascade together, it has serious implications for how we're living. We're really talking about the end of the civilization that we're in. But I think it's important to name that the end of civilization is not the end of everything. And there's a difference. There's a really beautiful book just come out by Dougal Hine. I was in a launch with him recently called At Work in the Ruins, about just that point. We're looking, according to security analysts, at 3 degrees of warming to outright chaos. We know that it's going to have implications for food security and drop in yields, and the melting of the glaciers, up to 10 degrees of sea level rise and taking out major cities in the planet. We're not heading in a good direction. And in that thematic way, let's just remember what we built Extinction Rebellion on was the idea of it's okay to feel. It's okay to feel. And feelings include not feeling, you know? That feeling of sort of shut down. We've heard this before, yeah, like maybe we'll just have a minute, you know, how is it in your body right now? Because one of the key feelings, there were many feelings, a feeling of despair, the kind of thing that takes you off on your own, and that's when you want to get with other people. The feeling of grief is really the price we pay for love, as this quote says. And there's something about the way life is asking us to remember how beautiful she is. You know, in that grief, in that moment. Like, when we feel into our bodies, can we remember, I was just out with the trees a moment ago, can we remember something really beautiful about life? Because actually, one of the things that these times does to us is to take us away. You know, this concept of hope. Somebody asked me, are you hopeful? I'm like, my life's okay now. And like, my children are already at risk. It's already not okay. It's already not okay in the global south. So why do we want to sit in a feeling of despair? You know, we can sit in what reality is. So what I'm suggesting is that there's a practice that every time you're feeling the grief, that's asking you to maybe picture some part of nature that feels beautiful to you, some part of life that feels beautiful. Not to get rid of the feeling of grief, but to bring in the love. I don't know who's tending the garden out here, by the way. Somebody has put a little red box with some water in just to create a micro pond. And blessings on that person's life. You know, there's Mary Reynolds' work, We Are the Ark. It's to do the acts of random kindness, restorative kindness, in all the places where we can. Beautiful work. And it always touches me when a human being's done that. So, Extinction Rebellion and sister movements, you know, our friends in Insulate Britain, Just Stop Oil, and many other movements across the world, we made some change, right? We launched and we made some change, we made some noise. And I think we need to now face what the barriers are to making the changes that we actually need when the carbon emissions are going up. So we had these 3 demands that have been slightly rewritten. And with each one of them, we had successes. You know, there was a declaration of emergency, there was an announcement of net zero, there was select committees that brought together a citizens' assembly. It's on the BBC, it's really worth a watch. Analytica said XR was the #1 global influencer on the climate across the planet in 2019. And we were told by many people, whether it's civil servants or MEPs or sustainability workers, that we'd really changed the narrative. So there's something about the ability to shift ideas. And that's what we've done so far, is shifted ideas. And that is partly because where the power comes from in social movements is the ability to agitate. It's the ability to make a noise and insist on a focus on something. And that's what we did. We said, we're not going away, you've got to listen to us. And when the agitation moments happened, you can have another moment where you inspire people about what's possible. And that's a really necessary thing. You know, what else could we be doing? And part of what we need to think about there is, what is our real ability to vision the change that we want to see? Like, how well are we able to think about that when part of our spirits are being crushed by the system that we're living in? And then there can be an orchestration, which is when you sort of act across different groups and try and pull things together and make change. And I think what we're trying to do in April with the big one, by the way, and I hope everybody's going to make it down there, is to have that moment of togetherness and orchestration and talking to other groups. So, social movement, sorry, are you... I haven't been telling you to change the slides, have I? Oh dear. I'm on slide 9. Is anybody else dealing with the menopause at the minute, by the way? Just to say, yay, sisters! Estrogen, first time this morning. See if the brain's going to click into gear. It's a thing, isn't it? It's a thing. Blessings on Davina McCall at the minute. So, social movements, according to Stellan Hagen, who has sort of synthesised many different approaches to thinking about social movement theory, has 4 different parts to it. It's enacting the vision. Like, where are we trying to get to, folks? We keep saying what we don't want, you know? Citizens' Assembly is a useful step, but we're way beyond that, right? Something else has to come. And then there's the internal work you have to do in a movement, the decolonisation, ways of working together that works for all of us. There are moments when you can change things in society and you have to have enough power together to make that change, the power-breaking moment. When you focus on a particular target, you say, we're going to push it in this way. And then there's the dialoguing with the opponents. Now again, what could April do for us? If we can really name this year, I think this is what this year's about. I think from the legal agenda as well, some of us that are in court this year, it's about naming that we don't have a functional democracy in the UK. The wheels have fallen off some time ago. So what is important to name as well is that social movements arise from community. And it was a beautiful thing in 2018 when people joined us, came out on the streets. And I don't think they came from nowhere. It was just like random people. Some of us have been working with groups like Reclaim the Power, doing anti-fracking work and so on. There were Friends of the Earth groups, there were Transition Town groups, there were Green Party groups, etc. And as Mickey Cashtan says, you don't create a social movement, you invite it into being. You know, you feel into something, you're inviting something that's already wanting to come. And I think part of what I'm trying to sense into in the minute is, what's the invitation now? What are these times calling for? Because again, if we have a reality check, if you use DEFRA's own statistics, so none of this massaging of figures that they do, you know, with these climate statistics, and they keep saying, oh, well, if you go, we've decreased the carbon emissions in this country by 40%. Have you heard them saying that? It's because they closed down the coal-fired power stations. And I'm like, I wonder if it'll happen. There's a moment I want to say, you keep measuring back to 1990, right? Why are you going back that far? Do you measure your penis from behind your testicles? Is that how it works here? You know, why are we going that far back? Like, in the last couple of years, 2% decrease. They're not doing it right. And as good old Antonio Guterres named, government and business leaders are saying one thing and doing another. Simply put, they're lying. The results will be catastrophic. And I'm like, why have we got a system that puts sociopathic liars in charge, right? I mean, it's a genuine question. Why is that happening? So what are the barriers for change? Sorry, keep moving slides. I think I have to remember Nigel, but Yes. Do you know what? You've got menopause. I've got enough to cope with here, 2 different slide decks. So, this self-reinforcing, corrupted, anti-democratic, financialised, globalised political economy, it's a mess, right? It's a mess. So I just want to say, as one of the co-founders of XR, we've got Anne Nils here as well. Welcome. Thank you. I don't think any of us thought that those demands would ever get met by this system. I consider them a communications tool. It's good to say what you think we should be doing, but I don't expect, I don't know if you did, anybody was ever going to do that. And the way we wrote about it was because there's a system behind this that reinforces itself. They might either go into denial, or they might pretend they're going to do it, they might greenwash, there might be some change, but it won't be enough. Do you know what I mean? They're not going. It's not going to do it. I don't know if does anybody think this system's going to make the change? You know, right? Okay. So there's the thing, right? What are we going to do in the face of that? This political economy with its constant focus on growth. There's what's he called? Professor Murphy. Anyway, there's a scientist who sat down and done the maths and said, if you want to carry on having growth, by the way, in a few hundred years, you'll have to have all the energy from all the known solar system, and the waste heat will boil the planet at the surface of the planet. Just, you can't keep growing. It's just nonsense. Mathematicians trying to point out to economists that they're in a sort of mental unwellness with what they're saying. And within the system, the incentives are for bad behaviour to be incentivised, you know, this concept of externalisation of costs, pollution, biodiversity loss, and this idea that you build things to break, built-in obsolescence. All that's logical within this system. And it's got these, sorry, you're doing good. we've got some telepathy going. Good, thank you. Plug in the incentives and the feedback loops in our system, the self-reinforcing political capture, and more ability to just run the system on your own sort of vested interests. Inequality gets increased, and we now know that, you know, we've got about 6 people who own most of the world's wealth. Consumerism gets reinforced and the destruction of the planet. So it's sort of baked into the system, is what we're saying. Next slide. Okay. So it's stopping us from creating alternatives, and it's going to find ways to stop us from effectively resisting the harm it's doing. So, you know, it begs the question, what about systems? How do systems work, and what do you do about system change, right? Next slide. So we have to understand this is a system, and it has a purpose, and it has an underlying story to it. It has a paradigm. It is a part of a paradigm. The purpose is a very stupid purpose, but it is the purpose, which is grow more capital for the few to accumulate, right? And what the story is we have to do that because humans are selfish and greedy, and we just live in this inanimate machine world, and it's ours to exploit, and competition within markets is going to create the best outcomes within that mess, right? That's what the story is of neoliberal capitalism and the domination paradigm. I mean, the reality, there's some idea that actually it's beneficial as well. They'll talk about innovation a lot, but a lot of innovation comes through public money, in fact. And the reality is the increase in corruption, offshore tax haven shenanigans, money lobbying, monopoly power. You know, it's not really proper capitalism, actually. It's like all these monoliths that got all the power. It's destroying life, crushing people's spirits and well-beings, the sacrifice zones across the world, sacrifice peoples in the majority world. And there's a crushing of cultures. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the film School in the World, The White Man's Last Burden, about when we go around we have to educate people, to prepare people to be part of this globalised system, right? So the Western schooling is absolutely central to the destruction of the planet. Something our young ones, thank you Nils, not so young anymore babe, have been highlighting for some time. Next slide. I think this is a real poster, you know. What does a modern witch do is become a chemist, I realise. Witches were burnt, and I don't think it's because we weren't witches. I mean, maybe some women weren't. But, you know, there is such things like the flying ointment that women, not just women, but it was mostly the herbalists, they knew how to control women's fertility. And at that stage, in the 1600s, I think it was, the sort of nascent forms of capitalism needed more labour. We just had the plague and people dying, so we needed more people. So we had to get rid of the people that were controlling the fertility. And it was the witches, right? It was the herbalists and the midwives. And I've been working with flying ointment recently. Have I banged on about that to anybody here? With the amanita mushrooms in? Yeah, I've banged on about it to you, have I? You know the broomstick? You know, I'll tell you about it later. That's where that comes from. This paradigm, the domination paradigm, emerged over thousands of years, as far as we understand it. It seems to be associated with some kind of scarcity. Maybe something happened that traumatised people. And it has this mechanism in it that if what you want to do is grab resources off people, that's what you're about, then the resources you grab, you can use to shore up your power and grab more resources. It's got one of these feedback loops in systems, success to success mechanisms. And it's kept growing and changing shape, but it's always had that flavour to it, of domination, power over. So it went through phases of colonialism, the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved people, witch burning, the clearances. We are a colonised people here, you know. It's happened to us, it's in our bodies, we just sort of, it's become normal, we don't talk about that anymore. Neo-colonialism and now neoliberalism. You know, this is a thing of history and it's been in the making. It's taken over the entire planet. And we need to see it. You know, we need to see it and we need to separate from it and look at it from the side and not feel that it's just what is. Right? Next slide. So what systems do, and we've set up a system in XR called the self-organising system, that's another story, but it runs itself, it's got power in it, it enables people to come and go, it's got its weaknesses according to me, it's another discussion we can have, but systems sort of run themselves once you set them off, you can't control them. The rules in them mean that they become self-organising, right? And so this one is like an artificial intelligence, it's adaptive, and it is based on these simple rules, which include things like you create money as a debt, it's interest-bearing, so you have to grow the economy to pay the interest on the debt. And what it does, it sort of co-opts people to be part of it in some way. So like, what part are you playing in this system? You know, probably most of us here, some form of resignation. Now that microphone's just gone off. Oh, is it back? You know, if you're a sociopath, it's like, be chief exec of Barclays. I don't know, he's a sociopath, but you know what I mean. But for many of us, it's just a sense of resignation. For other peoples in the world, it's direct, you know, enslavement or oppression, different types. And what it's based on is perpetuating a certain feeling, which is so part of what being the change is about feeling what we're feeling. Because we're a people that have been cleaved from our bodies and our ability to feel, right? So what the feelings that are in this system are in the mindsets of scarcity, there's not enough, right? And this is what happens when you don't meet people's basic needs. You know, healthy cultures, that part of, you're in that culture, you're in that community, and your needs are met. Your needs for water, for food, for well-being, for people to connect with, for shelter. That happens in other parts of the world. This system doesn't meet people's basic needs. It leaves us in a sense of scarcity. It's a system that's separating, you know? We talk about nature, like it's over there. And I say this to activists who are burning themselves out. This is nature. This is the first bit of nature. If you're protecting nature, you start here, right? So it's powerlessness, a feeling that we can't do anything. It's a feeling. It's just a feeling, right? Powerlessness is a feeling. And another part of it is soullessness. Is the inanimacy of things. It's the sort of, you know, the anti-life, the deadening. It's a deadening culture. I don't consider it culture, I consider we live in a disease. And really what I want to say, probably a key sort of message, if you like, of tonight, is that it leaves us in a place of choice right now. This is what I think these times are about. We have a choice. Do you want to stay in the dead culture? Do you want to stay in the deadening of this culture? Or do you want to choose what life is about? Do we want to be welcomed back into life? And that means something thematically. I'll come on to that later. I think there's an active choice to be made, though. And I also want to say this is about all of our lives, because we keep talking about the emergency and quoting David King in the next few years and that. It's like we've got a job to do and it's going to be over. This is, you know, let's get with the... It's for all of our lives, this now. This is what our lives are about. I mean, you have choice in some ways, and that's part of the disease of our cultures. You can sort of opt out if you want, tune it out. I think... what do I want to say? One of the pathologies of this culture, so-called, is the desire for comfort. You know, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with putting your feet up and watching a nice film and whatever, a bit of that, a bit of rest. But there's something of comfort that is deadening. You know, we're alive for a short amount of time. We're here to be in life, to serve those that come before us and to be good ancestors. We're here to be in life, and life is not comfortable, it's got struggle in it, you know, but it's not bad. It's a presence, it's about being present to what is, right? Next slide. I don't know if you can see that well enough, but what I'm trying to say with this slide, with these circles, is that you can think of this system in different layers, right? There's the person at the centre of your own life, as you are, and the groups that you're in. And then there's the sort of what we say about those groups, you know? How is that group to be treated in this world? How are Bristolians to be? How are women to be? How are people not racialised as white to be treated, etc.? How are people who are differently abled going to be treated? And who gets their needs met? It becomes part of that story. And then we're in this enculturation system, the media system, the schooling system. It's teaching us to be in this culture. You have the economic and regulatory system, and around that you have so-called democracy and the rule of law. This is overshadowed by the global finance system, and without getting into the details, you know, it was a deliberate act, possibly by some people who thought they were doing something for the best, to remove democracy's proper... I've done that thing with the microphone again, haven't I? So you just tell me... Menopause head. Right, I need help. So the global finance system it's been set apart from democracy deliberately. You know, Nancy McLean, Democracy in Chains, if you want the details on that one. But it's to make people feel that they have no agency. It's part of the purpose of what's been set up. Whatever, and it's true, you know, whatever you vote for, you get neoliberalism. So it's all the same, isn't it? So let's not bother. It's a resignation, and then the markets are going to sort it out. That's not by accident. That was a deliberate. I don't mean to sound conspiratorial, but that's what some people wanted to set up to unleash the globalised markets. They had this mathsy sort of model, bollocks actually. Read Steve Keen. You know, it's not good modelling of how the economy works, but that's what they've done. Okay, so we're on the next slide. Right, so I'm just asking myself, why? Like, let's just, you know, maybe for a moment we're in this church, on this earth, in Bristol, you know, as you go above apparently some people have seen the Northern Lights in the last few days, you know, beautiful. You know, you think of this blue-green planet and the solar system, and it's been alive for millions of years, people have been around for, 200,000 years, and then we're destroying life on Earth, right? Like, really? Like, we just have to really ask ourselves why, right? So, there's some understanding developing about the nature of human beings. One way we could say it is that, you know, that we have these two hemispheres, the left and right hemisphere. The left hemisphere, do you know this work, Ian McGilchrist's work, the Master in Chemistry? You know, the left hemisphere is the sort of calculator. It abstracts, it looks at the world and it goes, here's a laptop, here's some water, and it's not really connecting, it's just seeing things represented as objects. It connects very strongly with the English language. We talk about the nounification of the world. It makes things things. They're not things. We're in a process. Life is a dynamic, alive process. The right hemisphere is very different. The right hemisphere takes data from other places, like your toes when you wiggle it. Gets you in your right hemisphere. That's why we do it. Mindfulness practices. You know, can you rub your two fingers together? Just really gently, enough to feel the ridges. So I'm told, if you try and balance on one leg, with your eyes closed, you have to use both your hemispheres. So I hope my hemispheres are looking very well tonight, actually. The nature of the systems that we're in are pulling us into this left hemisphere way of being separate from the world. And I can never say his name right, but a Russian author, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote that the line between good and evil runs through every human heart. It's actually through the hemispheres in some ways. It's not like the left is bad, but it has a way of being in its own pain, in the wounded child. There's a very beautiful TED talk by Jill Bolte-Taylor where she has a stroke, it takes out her left hemisphere, and she, as a brain scientist, is in connection with life. It's 7 million views. Jill Bolte-Taylor, Stroke of Insight. Well worth watching. So, the next slide. What we understand about human beings is that we have very different ways of being, right? So this is a theory called polyvagal theory. And it hands up if you've heard of polyvagal theory. A few people, cool. So there's this sort of triple F, they call it, fight, flight, freeze, or dissociation. What this system of enculturation does is it tries to keep us shut down, slightly shamed, separated, numbed out. So when you don't think you can feel anything, that's what you're feeling, is the dissociative feelings. The fight, flight, you know, the rage, the wanting to leave, that's another set of feelings. And there's a different system in our bodies called the ventral vagal system. And that's the system of social engagement where we are curious and we're like, what the fuck is Gail on about? You know, but listening still, trying. It's playful, it's empathetic. It's because it's not, when you're feeling empathy, it's because the other person is you. You know, that's what that golden rule means. That sense of one person's pain is your pain, you know, that interbeing. So there's some choice here because we have a choice of which one of these systems to be in. And there are somatic practices, yoga practices, meditation practices, whatever, golf might do it for you, you know, climbing, whatever it is, sitting in nature, that helps you to reconnect to life. And I think it's really anybody who wants to be an activist, to work out what your thing is that helps, right? Just firstly at an individual level, move on to groups in a bit. It's going to be part of being the change. We have to be functioning human beings for the shit's going to hit the fan folks, right? Now, this idea that the sort of left hemisphere can take over and can drive systems into its own likeness has got a name. It's been given a name. Next slide, please. It's called, in the Algonquin languages, it's called wetico. And it means, and they also call it white man's disease. And one of the things about, do you know, I don't know if you've been in this, I bet, any form of addiction, anybody who's had addictive issues, I have, there's a hunger that you can't meet. When there's a trauma or a pain, and you try to do something to feel better rather than healing the trauma, that's when this sort of left hemisphere thing takes over. In other cultures, in the Buddhism, it's called the Rakshasas. In Hinduism, in Buddhism, Rakshasas. In Buddhism, they call it the hungry ghost. you know, and it often, this idea it comes in winter because that's when there would have been less food around. So it's an insatiable appetite. What did you say to me earlier, Neil, when you were asking me a question like, why are these people, why can't they see that they're harming themselves? And I said to you, think about addicts, right? Think about the people running the systems are not in humanity. It's an artificial intelligence. It's a wetico mindset. It's not going to do the business. See what I'm saying? So we know this in our own culture as vampires and zombies. You know, that's how we talk about this pathologizing that happens for human beings. And so the issue is like, okay, if that's what we're doing, how are we going to be differently with this? What does this require from us? Because it's become systematized. So we have to know about complex systems, right? And as John Muir said, when you try to pick out anything in the universe, you find it's hitched to everything else. Everything's interconnected. Systems, whatever type you're talking about, have some things, have these feedback loops, and I've mentioned a few times, can reinforce, change, or control it. They have this beautiful thing called emergent properties. It happens in nature as well. You set up a set of simple rules, and then something emerges that you didn't necessarily expect. It can be good or bad. You know, in nature it's beautiful. In a system like we've got, you get Donald Trump, you know. I don't know if anybody's seen that film Hypernormalization. You know, we're talking about mass psychosis now. When you let enough people, part of what the anti-democratic movement has decided to do is just confuse the fuck out of people. Just give them this information, that information, something else, this conspiracy theory. Some of it's been done deliberately. So at some point you're just like, well, I'm just going to get on with my life over here, you know? So that's an emergent property. You know, same with the social media and what that's done within this system. Thank you. I was trying to remember my BSL. Thank you. So I think we know about tipping points, you know about climate science. You can get so far and then suddenly it's too much. So there's a tipping point that we could have towards fascism in this country. To be honest, that feels like a possibility. And systems are formed of nodes and links. The connections between things really matter. Okay. So look, next slide. Oh, yeah, we're heading for collapse. Next slide. Because at least three systems are pretty fucked, basically. One is that you have this finance system, and as Mandelbrot, who was the father of complexity theories, analysed it, it's like a house of cards built on sand, is the way he said it. Like it's like some stupid, massive Ponzi scheme. We saw it wobbling in 2008. And then you've got the climate system, real part of, you know, this real thing. That's got 16 tipping points in, and 5 are close to tipping or already tipping. And then if you've read Regenesis, George Monbiot's new book, you know, talking about the food system is inherently weak in itself anyway. It's gone very standardised. The food is lacking in diversity. I think the 4 plants that give us 60% of the calories grow in just a handful of countries. They're subject to the climate system and the finance system. I don't know if anybody's looked in their supermarket recently and seen weather effects on the food system, right? So they're going to be subject to shocks from climate, from pandemics that come out of the system, and from the finance system. Now, one of the things with the globalisation of wetico is it wants to make things a monoculture. It creates really strong dependencies between actors, and it concentrates things. So what wetico, what the left hemisphere wants, is control and certainty. But the more it tries to do that, the less control and understanding it gets, funnily enough. Because what it's doing is sort of is making things unstable. And apparently there are certain things that you can measure within a system, and you know that it's going to collapse when those things are in place. And it looks set up to collapse, basically. There's whole academia around collapse. Jen Bendel's been talking about it for a long time. It's called collapsology and so on. So the UK in itself is in a weak position. Nafis Ahmed wrote about this in Byline. We've gone through the 4 different stages of neoliberalism. We can share the slides. Yeah, sure. I told you. Neil's just prompted me about the time. We'll have a little break in a minute. The 4 stages of neoliberalism have been implemented. They're about privatisation, liberalisation of markets, cutting prices, and then doing free trade things, moves to get rid of regulations and so on. And then it's got nowhere to go. And what happens is you get something that's so predictable, they're called IMF riots, that break down into sort of society. And the levers that the system has, whether it chooses to increase taxes, cut spending or change interest rates, they're at the end of their use of their lifestyle, really. So the solutions to the problems that we've got in this country are not going to come from the system, even with its own policy levers that it has. And we already know there's something like 1,500 excess deaths. Is it per week or per month? Actually, I need to check that one. But there's a lot of excess deaths happening at the minute. It's not cool. Next slide. So that's my local Tesco this week. Yeah, to me this collapse has begun. I don't know if people have been around somebody who's dying. I wonder if this system's going to be like this. You know, you have that gradual decline and then there's a drop. Like COVID hits, and then it just seems normal again, and you get used to it, and then it declines again. You know, do you know what I'm talking about? I sort of wonder if that's how this collapse is going to be. Do you hear what I'm saying, folks? I'm saying it's going to collapse in our lifetime, assuming we're all blessed enough to live for the next 10 to 20 years. So what are we going to do, right? What did you say, though? Yeah. Well. I mean, and to what purpose, against who and for what, right? I mean, I agree, obviously. So, we'll find a break moment in a minute. So you know, I'm a bit of a generalist. I read a lot of books and watch a lot of stuff. The point is so you don't have to. I mean, I can give you loads of references. The idea is to try and synthesize something together. This is Donella Meadows' work on, next slide please, on systems. You can look at how you make change in systems. You can look at the rules of the system, the structure of the system, the mindset and paradigm really matters. That's one of the biggest leverage points, is changing the paradigm that you're in. And there's something about the power to see that this is something that's not us. This is not what human beings are about, right? This is what I'm trying to get over in this talk. Next slide. So this is called the Bacana two-loop model. I don't know if you've seen it before, but the idea is this is what happens when systems collapse. You have some pioneers that are the seeds of the new thing that could come, some seed. And as it's falling down, there's some really important work that's called hospicing. Vanessa Adriotti talks about hospicing modernity. Like, how do we stop, how do we help this system to have a good death, right? How do we stop it doing more damage on the way down? Well, like, I don't think, for example, Barclays Bank are ever going to turn into some great human, you know, doing a great thing. They're doing what they need to do within the system, and they're incentivized to harm. But we can give them enough hell that they pull out of some things and move some money into some better thing, and that's worth doing, right? We can campaign for our rivers to be well. We can campaign for reduction in plastic. We can raise awareness. There's a lot of hospicing work that's worth doing. What also needs to be focused on is the emergent system, is what's coming. You know, what are the seeds that we're sowing right now? What do we help to be born in this time? So here's some key questions, and then we'll have a little break. As this system collapses, what can we do to hospice it and have a good death? And then it's the question of what it collapses into. Again, Daniel Schmachtenberger, if you want to nerd out, talks about the third attractor. The first attractor is attraction into a form of surveillance, capitalism, fascism. You can see all of that, seeds of that all around, right? Deep control. You know, I think maybe everybody here is racialised as white, I'm not sure. They'll be building walls in our names. They'll be closing down the migration routes on our behalves. Is that what we want? you know. So geoengineering's on the table these days, and a few people would be allowed to live. I'm not here for that. That's not what, it's not about surviving these times, it's about transition for me. So I made a note here about genetic differences. There's some research that some people, it's up to 30% of people genetically are what you call differentists. They want things to be the same and to feel at one with people. And they are very, very subject to the culture wars that are there that are trying to divide and separate us. And fundamentally they want to feel safe. And it's a question, how do we take care of folks who are going to be pushed in the direction of fascism? Because they're in our families, right? And the other potential collapse is into, it's just cheery stuff, isn't it? The other potential collapse is into chaos. That's why we stay for the other half, because it's like, what do we do about it? What we get, is into chaos, the sort of Mad Max, you know, what Roger likes to bang on about. Everybody's getting this, that and the other's happening to them, you know the drill on that. So that's the question I'm sitting in, is like, what can we do to support the emergence of a resilient human system that's repairing life on Earth? And that's what I think the question of these times is. So let us just have a minute. Told you to go on a bit. I am done, I've got a lot more, so I just don't know if everybody's coping with it. But I think the thing to do is to just feel something for a minute. I just want to invite us to do a little somatic practice and then maybe turn and talk to the other person. We could have a loo break if people want, but I'll get on pretty soon, I think. But so first things, you just want to give your body a little bit of a feeling, you know? Don't just beat yourself up, you know, give yourself a bit, feel what you're doing. You've got an arm. And my legs. Oh. Anybody else want to decide it? Just move a bit of Right. Do you want to just check in with the person next to you? I'm just wanting to find a way to say this to help us really feel it. We're a species in this web of life. And as we understand what we're doing and possibly why we're doing it, like what can life teach us about how to be the change? If you think of life as an intelligence, you know, I could sort of show off and nerd off a bit. There's the way the physics is at the minute, the universe is informational. There's a very close connection now between what people talk about and think spiritually and what physics is saying. Cosmic hologram, Dew curve, if you want to go down that route. And also the matter with things in the Gilchrist. There's an intelligence to be felt into. That's what I want to say. So can we do the next one? So we've got life. We've got this nightmare fucking wetico system doing its thing, and we're trying to work out how to help it to die, because nobody knows where the off button is, except we've got an idea. Coming in a minute. And then we've got this other system, this alive system, this complex system as well of life. And it does several things. Complexity emerges from simple rules, like what the ants can get up to. They're amazing. It's got fractals. Think, you know, when something happens at a small level, it can repeat at bigger levels. There's a theory that's not well accepted in science. It was part of the science I did, on the edge of it anyway. Ask me about that later. To do with morphic resonance, you know, Rupert Sheldrake's work, the idea that if you get things right at the small scale. And then you have this beautiful emergence as well. So what would it be if human beings were emerging into something new right now, what would that look and feel like? What can life teach us about that? Next slide. So one of the first things that makes life work so well is it's all about diversity. That's where its strength is. So we're talking about how can we let pluriversal ways flourish, that many ways of knowing and being in the world. There are many different cultures out there that are actually beyond the domination paradigm. I went to, in some despair a year or so ago, talking to our co-female Willie Clue, who runs our XR International Solidarity Network, all full of the domination paradigm this and the domination paradigm that. And he said, Gail, it's not like that all over the world. And they are the seeds of the new world, that people have remembered how to be on this planet right now. So next slide. So healthy, thriving cultures, they grow from the land that they're in, and they learn to live harmoniously there, and that knowledge is already out there. And what our XRISN have been doing is connecting those cultures that are hanging on to their ways of being and knowing the world and being in the world. The fancy words are epistemology and ontology. You know, how do you be in the world? And these times asking us for us to make ontological shifts, if you want to have that language around this. Now, those communities that are staying in their ways of knowing and being in the world are inherently in resistance. That's what our Kofi means when he's talking about communities in resistance. And education is key to how they function, how they choose, what they're choosing to educate within those communities. Because what happens is that Western education goes over and says, we know best, we're here to, you know, the white savior behavior, we're here to sort of help you develop and grow. And the value of the education that's within the community gets lost and gets stamped on. So what our young ones have been working on from XRISM, from ones from XR Youth that moved on from Global Majority Versus, is the concept of PRALA, Planet Repairs, Action Learning, Education Revolution. Our Mills has got all the lowdown on there if you want to go and ask them about it afterwards. But what that's about is honouring the education systems that exist in the world already. Seeing them, valuing them, and saying, for God's sake, hang on to them. Don't believe the bullshit about send your best people to Oxbridge, teach them some fake economics and get them to run the, you know, your country according to what the global financial system wants it to be. Next slide. And so, you know, we sort of, one of the things that I've noticed, and in my, I'm just speaking for myself, like, but I suspect it's pervasive. We talk about wetico whiteness. It's what people racialize as white, what happens to us within this system. There's a lot around being shut down, and Stu Basman and I are doing a workshop on Friday with the Regenerative Cultures team on this subject, and we're going to do detail about it. But one of the things is we think we have to invent everything. We think we're the centre of all the stories, and we need to, and it's about us, and we have to save the world. And what if we could just stop for a minute, you know, like that? That's how I get, and just look at what's happening in the rest of the world, right? There was a really key moment in XR that just passed most of us by, and I couldn't really feel it in my body for quite a while. Welcome, sister. And what it was that Petros and Francia got elected in Colombia, you know, and an XRISN and our network there had something to do with it. I don't say like we'd made it happen, but we were part of that. We were funding some of the work there. You know, I mean, just to share, I had to sign off some armed bodyguards for the work that we were doing in Colombia, you know. And we just, and I sort of tell people that story in XR and they couldn't feel it. And what Kofi says is, look, Gail, that's our victory. And what it feels like when you're in a global family is that the victories across the world are ours because we're a human family, we're one family together. And when we're in the white, we're not white, right? We're Europeans, heritage. And when we're in that white body of wetico, we're just separate and it's something going off somewhere else. It's not our story. Do you see what I'm saying? is something to tackle. So next slide, sorry, just before next slide. These are some of the amazing stuff that's going off in the world right now that our ex-OISM folks have been connecting to. In Rajava, this corporation Jackson, Good and Bushri movement in India, the land workers movements in Brazil, landless workers movements, the Zapatistas, etc. We've had folks go and visit some of these communities and make deep connections. So when we're talking about this Picana 2 model, and I'm saying there's some seeds and there's some connections to be built. What if those were the seeds and what if those were the connections that we need to make, to take our minds out of, Boris fucking Johnson and whatever's going off here into the bigger picture. Next slide. So I'm going to slip over this one, but I think there's something about working on what it means to be racialized as white as an identity that we didn't ask for and choose, and what is in that identity, what's being done to us, a part of that I think is a key part, because you can't, something about reconnecting with our indigeneity can involve, go into the garden, connect with the trees, listen to the birds. It's important stuff to reconnect with our land. And there can be a bit of a bypass if we're not connecting to the global human family, and that's been stopped by the mechanisms of white supremacy racism. It's a big topic, but we've got to do it, folks. We've been asked for it for a long time, and I know things have been happening. I'm not here to shame or get in anybody's case, right? I'm just saying it's a thing, and it's to do with us. It's not when I'm doing it on behalf of somebody else. It's a recovery process. Oh, okay. Those birds in the trees, by the way. I didn't even know, the other night, do you know that classic owl noise when it goes to-woo, to-woo, that one? I didn't know which owl it was, embarrassingly. So and I've got some tapes of some birds. I was listening. Do you know that one? It actually goes coo-wick, coo-wick. That's the female. And the male goes whoo, whoo, whoo. And it's outside my house where I've just moved. Beautiful. It's tawny owls. I didn't know that. Like in other cultures, it's not just tawny owl, it's tawny owl Bob and Felicia. Like they're people, they're beings, right? Aren't they? It was Valentine's, and I was like going to my boy, Kawick, Kawick. We were practicing. Oh dear. Oh, it's a thing, it's a joy. We've got our lives to become our indigenous selves, right? What a pleasure, what a time to be alive, I think. So, right. So there's an intelligence that operates as a whole. Gaia does these things. You let us go of things that aren't working for us. Letting go of this system is a thing that we're going to do. And so I think there are many, many different ways of doing this, but we have to name this anti-life paradigm now. When Ex-Alpha started, there was this sort of funny thing that happened where, the left were sort of going, well, they're not anti-capitalist enough, they're not doing this. It's a bit like what the left does. Somebody once said to me, the left, when it does a firing squad, it stands in a circle. That was going on. And then the right, the Policy Exchange, did this sort of report on some of us. Well, they're really, anti-capitalist, system change people, they're really serious, blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking, at least they did their fucking homework. I mean, like, obviously they tried to make us look bad. We're just saying this is not working for us. And at that time, it didn't feel like you could say that. The Overton windows moved, and we got to move it again. Right, in whatever way you're talking, naming, let's not be frightened of saying this is not democracy, folks. This is not acceptable. This is a sham. The economic system is broken, and we can do something else, right? So we've got to name where we are. Next slide. And it's about disaggregating. That's what I'm really trying to get over. It's not us. We're better than this. As an Indigenous guy said recently, John, on a film, human beings are so much better than this, right? Let's believe in ourselves. Next slide. We can move on from that one and that one. So, life works in fractal layers with diverse nodes and many threads and links. So we've time to get local. So what does that mean? Next slide. Local. There's a lot, I think there's a lot now that's about location. Right, and we're going to get into this. This is where we need to workshop this, build on it. I know there's people looking at cooperative movements, our Roman Gully, others are looking at that stuff. There's the beautiful movement called Homes for Humanity. I mentioned Mary Reynolds' work, Arkin. There's the mutual aid networks. There's something about what's happening in our locality on these different fronts. What our Prayler family are saying is that we need to focus on the land and food sovereignty, on cooperative economics, and on the media and communications that's happening in the locality. Can we make ourselves part of a trusted network of people where we understand who are the people around us that are politically serious right now, that know that this system's on its way out? Because what the system wants us to do is either ignore it or go into sort of plaster mode and making it okay. And of course, we want to look after each other and take care of each other, but how do we see that as a political act and as a wider intention around what political change we're going to be bringing about? And with each one of these, it's like, how can we bring deliberative democracy and other things like democratic confederalism, with what they're doing in Rojava, into our spaces? And then the next slide, the global, is that what we're suggesting, you know, like Exile's been like, right, you know, everybody get into civil disobedience, get on the streets, demand the change. I'm not saying that's not part of what we're doing, but there's another place where we're saying this is about all of our lives, it's about learning. You know, what else is happening in other parts of the world? What do we need to do? What's ours to repair? What's ours to take care of? Where is our joy? You know, where is our lives in this, right? And what we're saying with Prayler is that we want to go into communities of lifelong learning, COLSAGs, what is it? Study action groups. They like their acronyms. And when we're in good enough shape, we can make links to other communities in resistance across the world. You know, what if like Bristol and you've got a women's group, we connect to one of the women's group in India and to a women's group in Colombia, and then the cooperative farm connects to this farm here. Not for any saviour messing about behaviour, you know, that stuff, or not for patronisation, but for human relating, for what can we learn from each other, for seeing each other as human beings, you know. So that's the global bit where we link to other parts of the world in solidarity. And then, okay, so I'm talking about the conditions that nature does that helps things to emerge, right? Oh, somebody's just going to say, I think that Gail Bradbrook's had too many drugs recently. I've had enough. Anyway, so, and there are, what's already emergent in the world, and we don't have to make all this stuff up. It's like what's already in each location, what's missing, where are the gaps, right? There are emergent networks for supporting specific areas. So you've got like Salmon Nation that are looking from California to Alaska as a bioregional economics, Molly Scott Cato's work, that sort of thing. Via Campesina supporting the sort of local agroecological land workers movements across the world. And there are folks like RXIS and Prayler folks are making connections, or the Global Tapestries Alliance. There's emergent bodies at different layers. This is why this is a head book to give this talk and why it's scrambling all our brains. I'm talking about very personal, I'm talking about the global system, I'm talking about layers and levels in between, emergence and nature. It's a bit much, isn't it? I don't know what I was thinking. Right. I thought Bristol can cope with it. Can cope with it. Another bit, we're going to get there. Another bit is that collaboration is essential. Nature is, you know, you could talk about competitiveness. I don't know, you know, God, dare I say this? Yes, I'm going to say it because that's what I do. You know, David Attenborough, I know he's a national treasure, but when you watch him talk about nature, it's all this is attacking that and that's there to get there. And you're like, the cooperation, the beauty of cooperativeness, it's from a certain lens, actually. Have you seen that thing he's done recently as well about, what was it, David Attenborough's Special Times or something, when he's just literally walking into somebody's house and helping? Have you seen it? It's really embarrassing. It's on the BBC. It's so colonial. Oh my goodness. Anyway, Gail, shush, brain. Collaboration. Next slide. We're meant to collaborate. We're just a deeply collaborative species. Now, this is part of the internal movement work. You know, this is part of how we have to be and show up together in our locations. Next slide. And I'm talking about working out how to do collaborative, somatically supported practices together. Like, what do I mean? Well, there's a whole workshop on that I haven't written yet, but we had a piece of work done in Excel called the Systems Realignment Project, where a whole pile of collaborative practices were defined. How do you make decisions together? How do you do feedback and learning? How do you do conflict? How do we decide how resources are shared, etc.? In order for systems to work well, we have to skill up around collaboration. Collaboration requires dialogue and it requires agreements to be made. It's a thing to work out, because as the shit is the fan, did I mention that's going to happen, is happening, we have to be really good at this stuff. So, and sometimes you sort of skip over that because it's really sexy when you like throw the paint at the, you know, picture in the National Gallery, it goes viral, great, amazing actions. But this stuff, it's hard work, this matters. Regenerative cultures is one of XR's principles and values. It's not less important than all the others. It's the most important one, in my opinion. Next slide. So, I mean, just to say, in other cultures, this that work is embedded in the culture to the point that it's not thought of consciously, probably. There's a really amazing film called Tawe by Bruce Parry. Have people seen that one? Tawe, I think I'm saying it wrong. And there's some two extras. One of them is the Mbele people in the Congo. Our Coke is a bit cross about it because it's not talking about their resistance story. So that aside, one of the things it is doing is showing how that community keeps the good mind. Oren Lyon speaks about this. It's the cultivation of a collective good mind, right? It's a thing that healthy cultures do. What the Mbele people do is sort of seasonally, the women take the piss out of the men. The women have a laugh, they get together, the sisters, there's no separation between the sisters, none of that that's been done to us here. And they take the piss and they have a laugh, and the men are just all like, oh, yeah, we do. Because it needs naming. And then the men get up and they dance out the alpha male. They have an alpha male and they dance it out the village. And the peace is reset, right? It's beautiful to see that. That's what, now, like, what's our version? What's Bristol's version of that? Oh, it's probably a rave, isn't it? Let's face it. Amanita was all part of the raving culture of the Vikings, we think. So, you know, that's coming back to soon. We're going to get better at neurocognitive development. It's like, how do we take care of our bodies and our togetherness? And we're going to take care of the stories we tell ourselves. Because, I mean, it was sort of good to be a bit punky in exile and say, we're fucked, you know, and everyone's going to get raped and all that stuff. If we keep telling ourselves that story, guess what's going to happen, right? Like, what story are we telling? Part of that shutdown into dissociation is a lack of ability, I'm doing it again, is a lack of ability to vision the future, to hold that possibility. Like, so we have to develop that. Like, what is it we've seen and feeling feels possible? Right. Then we'll move on. Another thing in nature, you can have these rapid phase transitions, right? So next slide. And this is these power breaking moments. And next slide. This is I'm just a bookaholic, right? But David Graeber, David Wengrove, I don't know if folks have seen this one. It's a rewriting of human history. Humans have organized societies in many, many different ways. You don't need to get into that now, Gail's brain, shush. So, but one of the things it tells us in this book is that people live sort of, let's use the word, I know we're not allowed to, but quite anarchistic ways of hanging out together in community. But when the hunting season came and they needed to, you know, get some food together, the best hunter would be put in charge and everybody obey them, falling behind them. And I sort of feel like this is, we sort of need to find that in and out in our social movements where we're like, you know, we're just doing our thing here. Bristol's about the airport, or we're about, you know, Manchester's got its vibe, you know, that's what's been the power in exercise, that invitation into what's yours to resist, what's yours to focus on. But at some point we drop in behind the power breaking moment, right? But we have to intelligently sense what that moment is, what's possible. I am listening with curiosity to what our Roger Hallam's saying. I know he's a has its controversial sides, but around organising and designing a revolution. Is anybody else listening to that? He's doing a series of podcasts on it. Yeah, I'm interested. It's taken a while, isn't he? It's like there's a lot of foreplay here. You know what I mean? Anyway, next slide. New properties emerge when collaboration happens over time. So partly what I'm saying is we don't have to sort of, have it all worked out how this thing's going to go, but what is it that we can enjoy doing together that creates conditions? Because that can create new properties. Next slide. And we can create feedbacks in the system. And next slide. And here's more academia around what happens when you have a not-for-profit and it gets positive feedback loops running. Next slide. So what I'm imagining is a couple of things. I've got ages left. Sorry, you're all amazing. You can all slag me off afterwards for talking too much. I'm imagining that we will understand the domination paradigm as a pathology, like a human body can get a disease, like cancer, that it can take care of when it's healthy, when it's a healthy immune system. That's what bodies do. They get rid of cancer constantly. So what will that feel like as a human species? I'll tell you what, I think we're going to need to be in connection with our family across the world, right? We need to feel together. But as an example, I often use this example. If we wanted to stop the Adani coal mine, there'd be a group that was going after the bank that was funding it. There would be some of us going, if we wanted, in support with the front line, and there's some of us trade unions supporting people not to get the jobs that were being offered. There might be NGOs that are going after a legal case. There might be a focus on the insurance companies, like different actions, coordinated. It happens to an extent. I'm talking to philanthropists at the minute and saying, because the money decides what gets done, they have a bigger responsibility than they're taking at the minute, the people that are funding different movements. So some of us are doing that work, just to say, and I can talk more about that if you want to know more about that. Moving on to the next slide. Now, the biggest possibility that I can see in hospice and modernity is the moment at which we have enough collective solidarity to say we're not paying. Right? And we had a glimpse of that here in this country last year with the Don't Pay movement. Anybody got involved in that? Did. And it already had an impact. We had Eon going to Kwarteng and saying, you've got to deal with these people. It's an existential threat, he says. Not climate change is fine, but, you've got to get rid of these people. So it's going to come to a moment where people can't afford to pay, and whether it will be mortgages or bills or whatever, that's coming. And how can we catch and be in solidarity? And I think we've been really smashing, my dad was a coal miner, we've been really smashing this country thinking that we can come together. We've got to get over that now, recover and believe in ourselves. And, like in other countries, I think it was in Spain when people stopped paying their mortgages and there was solidarity about not paying the rents, and you go and you protect people's homes. It's going to be that level of coordination. Now, the other really amazing thing is that what the economic system needs to be is some version of what's called degrowth. Again, we can talk about that if we want to get into the details, but fundamentally what that, and it's not academia, it can be called the well-being economy or whatever, but what that is that we meet people's basic needs, universal basic services, and then beyond that, we operate within, if you like, Kate Raworth's donut. That's how I understand it anyway. So there's no way this system here is going to sign up for degrowth. So how are we going to do that? Well, Jason Hickel wrote, and he's just summarising other people's work, that degrowth will happen when the global south refuse to pay their debts. Right, so part of it, as these elections are coming, I'm doing some of this work this week, there's one coming in Ghana, for example, is you don't want this system, by the way, and we don't think it's right that you should be paying these debts. Making that direct connection with the people in different countries. There are certain things that need to be in place for debt repudiation to happen in global south countries. I don't want to necessarily get into that now, but we can do. That's what would create the degrowth. That'll be the moment, right? That's how we tackle the global finance system. We just say we're not paying anymore. Right? So it's a possibility, it could emerge. And next slide, that's when we'll be having dialogue with the opponents. Nearly done. Are we all right? Are you all right?
Yeah.
gosh.
Just on a roll.
Oh, are you all right? So one of the things that life does is this like an alive intelligence. Of course, it's a miracle. It creates more aliveness. I mean, that concept, like what is soil? You know, that soil creates itself with the creatures that are there. It creates more beauty, and especially it collaborates. It also learns. It has an inherent ability to learn, right? And so learning has to be at the heart of what we do. And that's what gets a bit lost when we're like charging ahead. We've got to get back on the streets, got to get more people on, got to keep buying demands in. Like, when are we going to stop? Be in relationship with each other, listen and learn, right? And that doesn't mean Gail standing up for 2 hours banging on necessarily, trying to. So next slide. So in terms of visioning, you may have heard of the sort of 3 horizons. Who's heard of the sort of 3 horizons concept? You know, the idea that there's what's here now, wetico, global capital, patriarchal, heteronormative, whatever you want to call it, stuff. And then there's the 3rd horizon we can't really see, we can just imagine, we can see maybe some cultures are already there or showing us something. There's also something called the 2nd horizon, which is like, it's where the imagination is of what could be in the 3rd. It's what's coming, it's what's possible, it's thinking afresh. Next slide. So we can think about that through these layers. Next slide, there's no way you can read this one, but it's talking about what it would look like when this emergence happens in these different, you know, horizon 2 and what horizon 3 looks like. And there's something for us all to be in that, right? In that emergence, like in that imagination, in that possibility. It's not like it's going to be easy, but something's going to leave us behind, right? And we have possibilities here. So next slide. So, you know, and we've got, you don't have to invent this stuff. We've got lots of people visioning. I'm doing it again. Lots of people visioning how to do economics different. Next slide. And then also, you know, things like universal basic services and the ecocide law, biomimicry. There's lots of brilliant ideas out there for what we need to do differently. Next slide. Nearly done. I'll come back next week if you want. So, like, right, Gail, what the fuck was that about? What you actually want? What do you want us to do? You know, remembering that part of the left hemisphere wants certainty and control and information. So let's let too much of that go. But what we're saying in XR's being the change grouping is that it's relate. Is the first thing, relationship. Our relationship to ourselves, to the world, to our human family across the world. It's repair. You know, what is ours to repair? What is ours to make well? We have agency at different levels in that. And how do we do protection moves? How do we do resistance moves together? And how do we become the human species that we could do at a global level together? Those are the sort of stages. Now, you know, just to summarize, I'm talking about the supporting of the knowing, you know, the naming of this anti-life program, and that there are other possibilities. And I think we sort of, you know, what we said early on in XR was like, you know, we're beyond politics and, you know, we're not about solutions or about citizens' assemblies. It's nice and simple messaging. I think we're at a stage now where we can say we want, this is my opinion, we want degrowth, we want deliberative democracy, we want to change the democratic system. I think we should be naming that now. I think we should be coming out with a sort of, like, I would always call it, and this was what part of what XR was, by the way, because Compassionate Revolution, Rebrand Advisor, no, we had a draft manifesto, always draft. It's never fixed because there's always information, always things to learn, isn't there? But there's something that we're behind, there's something that we're for. I think it's time for that now, personally, to be naming what we're for. And there's just a collective sense making that has to happen around that. And then there's the being. You know, I've mentioned these collaborative somatic practices that where we work together. Somebody who's into regen, come and talk to me about that. We need to make workshops. They probably already exist. We need to be really into learning. Again, go and see our Nils about forming a coal sag to get into lifelong learning and the connections through Prela if you're interested. And then there's the local, you know, what is Bristol, or what's going on in Bristol, what's going on in the locality you live in, where are the gaps? what's needed. If you're thinking about collapse, who's doing what, you know, and can we be in a serious political conversation together? I mean, as an example, it's like not impossible in a location to stop paying council tax and start to pay for installation if there's enough strength, you know. I think some councils probably quite welcome it, truthfully. It's worth a try, but we have to have enough connection to do that kind of stuff. It might feel hard to imagine now, but as the wheels fall off, you know, where's the food going to come from in our location? If we're not feeding people, they're going to get asked to go to war. You know, I'll get miserable again, stop again. Right. And this pushing for intelligent power breaking moments, you know, the push for the change. So I will do the next slide. Like, here's the, like, just try and lift this. In what I'm trying to say is that I believe in human beings, actually, that in our best natures, we're the expression of love in many forms. We're the expression of life. We're in a dance with the intelligence of the cosmos. So we sort of danced a bit weird for a bit. You know, the story of fall from grace, and we got too much information and we can be like God's us. We've done that bit. Now what's next for humanity, right? It's a complex and life system nature. We're looking for pathways towards becoming a human family again. One that thrives with and as nature. You know, we're talking about as being nature in adaptable networks and systems. And we're looking at a multipolar world of pluriversality. There's a mouthful for you. But what we mean is that there's no one power center here. There's different groupings across the world. And that there are many ways of knowing and being. That's what pluriversal means. And what our, you know, to honour our Skeena, who's on a prayer retreat at the moment, really wanted to bring this through, the concept of basing our human family on allo mothering, which is the foundation of our communities, is the taking care of the needs that are amongst us, especially for the most vulnerable, our babies and others. And allo mothering means it's not just one mother in a family, it's all the community that is, its primary focus is the care and raising of the next generation. Allo mothering means. Next slide. And I, you know, like it's quite hard, it's quite easy to feel disempowered when you look at this system and all the people in it, and Jacob Rees-Mogg and all that. Bless him. Is my stretch of compassion. And they've got all the toys and all that, and they've got all the cash, etc. Except it's meaningless, the money, isn't it? We just let it have the meaning. And like, what have we got? You know, what we have is, I call it magic source, right? In it all, it's one love, it's togetherness. It's the place where you can lift vision, bring it together with togetherness, have agency, and root it into wisdom. When you have those components together, there's an attraction that happens in these things, come together. Life wants to collaborate. And I think a different way of saying it, because you can do all the organising, that's important, you mechanise it, use the left hemisphere, get all the systems, that's what it's for, in service to vision. But you have to have spirit, and it's the container that we create together. And I sort of got to a point actually where I think, hubris, Gail, that, you know, we're going to solve something, save something, sort it. Maybe we're all going to die. Well, we are definitely all going to die, so we could just not worry about that. Maybe we're all going, I don't know, you know, it's not about that. It's not about knowing. Again, left hemisphere wants certainty. It's not about, oh, well, what's the plan so that we'll be all right. What about being all right now with where we are? Do you see what I mean? And what about creating the conditions that make it possible? And what if those conditions are what it's about, being alive at this time? What if it's about being more human? What if it's about being welcomed back into life, into the family of life together? What if we focused on that? You know, I don't know what that means for everybody here, but that's what I feel it as. And then let's see what comes. When that becomes a priority, not like, we'll fix it, you know. We'll do that as well. Do it calmly. I'll tell you later if you want. It's very old boy and young boy. You know that one. We don't need that slide, so let's move on to that one. So, you know, in that way, as Tia Cassin Ghost Horses, the Lakota elder said, it's the hardest time to be alive, but it's the greatest honor to be alive now and to be allowed to see this time. There's no other time like now. We should be thankful for creation did not make weak spirits to live during this time. The old ones say this is the time when the strongest spirits will live through, and those who are empty shells, those who have lost the connection, will not survive. We have become masters of survival. We will survive. It's our prophecy to do so. And then final slide. You'd be pleased to know. And I always quote this these days in talks because I love it. It's Pat McCabe, who's from the Diné or Navajo Nation, who's a mother and writer and artist. And she said that humanity has low self-esteem right now as a species. We have this idea at this moment that all we touch, we destroy. Not so, not so, not so. That's not inherent in our nature. It's a learned response to certain beliefs and to a certain paradigm that we've agreed upon. So let's just imagine that we are beautiful human beings that can create a spirit together and lift up the change by being nature together. What would that look and feel like? I don't know, but what a thing to be curious about. Thank you.